Hello and welcome to episode number 24 of In Pursuit of Clarity, entitled On the Virtue of Intolerance. As the world has so profoundly shifted to a focus on economics and the markets, and the merchant class has ascended to total power across much of the West, especially with regard to media, popular culture, and the shaping of norms and opinions, and the general zeitgeist, many of our virtues and morals of past ages have been slowly but surely inverted in the process. And I'd like to discuss one of the most important of these, an inversion which I believe has helped make all of the others possible, namely the new cult of tolerance. Tolerance essentially means putting up with something one considers negative, or in some sense unhealthy or destructive. Intolerance is the instinct to keep these negative forces at bay. In stronger and healthier ages, this instinct was one of those that set Western nations apart, especially as it applied to ourselves, and even more so on an individual level. Throughout history, our culture taught us that it was good to be intolerant of our vices or weaknesses, or our lack of discipline, or crude or ignoble behavior. It was this excess of intolerance that helped us lay the groundwork for the conception of chivalric knighthood, and helped foster the greatest and most courageous warriors, and helped cultivate the most wise and magnanimous and effective leaders. We learned to have our guard up against forces of weakness and degeneration, and all deeply poisonous influences, both as individuals and as groups or communities. We understood that it was this vigilance, and it alone, that acted as the city walls, to use an analogy, keeping chaos at arm's length. Historical examples were fresh in our minds back then, showing clearly what happens when we become lazy or short-sighted or forgetful. Corruption and degeneracy are always at the door, just waiting for the smallest opening to slither through and infect all they touch, with radiating ripple effects that often travel far and wide. Post-World War II, as the West began to fall into the hands of the most disreputable sort of hucksters, undermining the strength and solidity and confidence and health of nations, seemed to become a foremost priority of these ambitious men. And in fact, a few of the leading thinkers on this ideological side of the fence even admitted as much in their less careful and guarded moments. After all, to move towards the global community these new power brokers sought to lead, all allegiance to family, culture, or nation had to be destroyed utterly and replaced with a new allegiance, to what might aptly be called a new religious conception. The tenets of this new religion were, coincidentally enough, those that best facilitated these future goals. Diversity, somehow, was going to propel nations forward, and border security was now somehow a negative. Our traditional conception of family, with a two-parent household, and children growing up with a strong male and strong female influence, was now backward. And in fact, having children at all, this greatest and healthiest and most life-affirming act of creation, some might say the purpose of existence itself, was bad and selfish, especially if you should happen to be of Western lineage. And finally, seeking to keep the most negative and destructive forces away from yourself, or your children, or your nation, that brand of intolerance that has been a leading cause of, and one might argue a prerequisite for, greatness throughout human history, was cast as the greatest evil. And its opposite, the unconditional embrace of what we consider unhealthy, was raised on a pedestal, as a new sacred cow to worship and revere. Few happenings are more purely and perfectly indicative of the madness we're grappling with in our times. And how has this occurred? How have we been made to shift nearly 180 degrees in just a few short decades? How have otherwise reasonable and intelligent people been goaded and prodded into sprinting headlong, eagerly and enthusiastically, into their own destruction? The key word I used a moment ago was religion. I feel it's important to understand what Friedrich Nietzsche so presciently tried to warn us about at the turn of the century. In the minds of hundreds of millions, especially throughout the West, God is dead. Our traditional religious conceptions have been destroyed, and what remains is often so twisted, mangled, and subverted as to be unrecognizable to the point of being blasphemous. It's my contention that those leading the charge to turn our planet into a one-world shopping mall presided over by an insatiable merchant class have expertly both caused and taken advantage of the rising tide of atheism and the general disdain for belief in any higher power because they understand human nature. And they understand this God-shaped hole, as it's been described in the past, must be filled with something. Thus, our social justice warrior heroes and prophets of a new age, the LGBTQ movement, our Greta Thunbergs and rabid climate alarmists, this is the replacement set of morals and virtues and standards, crafted for the mass mind by the hidden hands behind the scenes. And tolerance, or rather their absurdly narrow and selective definition of the concept, is at the core of this new religious doctrine. This push has been successful due to an incredible coup with regards to language and thought pollution, namely the pairing of the term or conception of intolerance with hatred, or ignorance, or a mean-spiritedness, or some combination of the three. As if it simply wasn't possible to have one's guard up against threats to our health without negativity being the fuel and motive force. I can't help but think anyone looking down at us from a prior age would be completely baffled by these ideas. If presented with the choice of standing tall, and often at great cost, against all that might weaken their nation and make the lives of their children fundamentally worse, or making a public show of allying with these forces, like Pharisees loudly praying in the streets, and asking them which was the more truly selfless or noble or compassionate path, it's difficult to imagine anyone picking the latter. The latter would likely appear to them transparently self-serving, a Judas-like betrayal in exchange for the modern incentivization mechanisms that act as our pieces of silver. It's difficult to overstate the importance of our approach to the tolerance and intolerance dynamic, or the importance of exactly what we understand these words to mean. Prior ages seem to have intuitively understood that we all naturally consult cultural and societal norms to guide our behavior to some degree, and that this is especially true for children during their most impressionable years, and that it's only our intolerance towards the most destructive or aberrant or unhealthy behavior that keeps us all, as a group or nation, from backsliding. Our ancient conceptions of shunning, or even banishment for the most extreme offenses, were considered tough but fair, and in fact they were seen as the highest form of compassion, a word we've since allowed to be perverted into the most short-sighted caricature of itself. This ancient compassion was for the entire generation of children being shaped and molded, and towards those still to come, whereas our modern understanding of compassion seems to be more akin to an immediate granting of desires towards anyone seeking an upgrade in life conditions, regardless of costs to others. This isn't true compassion, and in fact it's suicidal, inevitably. It's not seeking long-term, stable and lasting solutions to profound problems. It's giving away our children's inheritance to allow far less than 0.1% of the world's poorest to have a new address that they call home and a few additional creature comforts. Our nations are becoming glorified hotels, which seem to exist in the minds of many for the purpose of offering a greater number of amenities to guests. And what's more, we have no proof that this mere economic improvement produces a genuine improvement in their lives at a fundamental level. Money, comfort, and convenience can so easily lead to scores of negative indirect side effects. How is it, then, that so many have come to see it as something of a cure-all? I've linked a worthwhile video clip below, a simple and concise visual representation of the absurdity of our modern immigration debate. The self-proclaimed elite like to paint the picture of our open borders being something of a means of saving the world from poverty. Not only is this absurd, as this video so efficiently proves, but any one of these billionaires who champion these ideas, like Soros or the Koch brothers, could quite literally eradicate world poverty in a matter of a year or two, using their own funds, if it meant more to them than hoarding their own personal wealth. And immigration is just one example of many. Children everywhere are now schooled in every variety of abnormal sexual behavior and taught that it's normal, healthy, even progressive or heroic, and encouraged to make the most extreme and permanent life-altering decisions accordingly, placing those convinced to transition their gender in a demographic bracket with a suicide rate nearing 50%. Crime is rising, streets are filthier, popular culture is becoming almost entirely filth. In short, our standards of behavior and human decency have been completely compromised, and this descent into something of a new Sodom and Gomorrah is hailed as progress. I believe a key to untangling this mess is our embracing something of a compassionate intolerance, and a recognition that these two conceptions aren't at all contradictory, a kindly and thoughtful and forward-looking intolerance, and destroying that ridiculous idea that being on guard against vice, weakness, degenerate or unhealthy influences is equivalent to hatred or must spring from a negative place. It's often the exact opposite. To use an example, if you truly love a drug addict, you don't enable his behavior until he dies a miserable death. You seek to find him treatment to get him back on his feet, as much for his sake as for the sake of everyone around him. Most of us have heard the popular cliché, if you can't help yourself, you can't help others. This holds equally true for communities and nations. If we allow the Western world to become the third world, all will descend into chaos. This is an inevitability, and nobody will be completely immune. The modern world is so interconnected that all is now contagious. This is one of the many reasons the libertarian mindset can be so upsetting. The mentality of, don't worry, they're only dumping the poison into their end of the pool, is both selfish and absurd, because no man is an island unto himself. So again, I'd like to see us someday extricate the conception of intolerance from the petty and hateful and ignorant caricature that's been so masterfully painted. A noble brand of intolerance was what created great nations and societies and individuals, and helped them retain their greatness. Making a virtue of its opposite is a death sentence, and serves only a handful of the worst type of human beings. Lowering our standards and embracing ugliness, degeneracy, and corruption is no virtue. A fatherly brand of intolerance, from a root of love and a desire to strengthen and improve, is what is needed, now more than ever. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my